We need protest songs. I think we need a lot of them, but also we just need to take our art and apply it. So my latest campaign is you can't spell felon without Elon.
Hello, Cleveland! Turn your speakers up to 11 because it's time for Too Much Effing Perspective, the podcast that asks musicians and entertainers to relive their most Spinal Tap moments that may not have been too funny when they happened, but are hilarious in retrospect. I'm your host, Alan Keller, a comedy writer in LA and former lead singer of the least heralded Chicago band, The Falling Wallendas.
And I'm your co-host, Alex Hoffman, former tour manager for PJ Harvey and former lead singer of the least heralded Milwaukee band, The Vainglorious.
Our guest today is groundbreaking 5-time Grammy and Emmy nominee, comedian and Renaissance woman, Margaret Cho.
Margaret tells us about the time ABC hired a consultant to teach her how to be more Asian, which contrasted with the time British actress Tilda Swinton thought Margaret was so Asian she could speak for her entire race and give Swinton permission to play an Asian man in a movie.
Margaret also tells us about her side gig as a sex toy tester.
So without further ado, let's go to the TMEP show.
It really puts perspective on things, though, doesn't it?
Not too much. There's too much effing perspective now.
Alex, comedy and music are two different forms of therapy.
What does that mean, Alan?
It means that musicians and comedians are just people who choose different forms of art to deal with life. When I was younger, I took my pain and turned them into songs.
But now you just take OxyContin?
That's why I'm oxycontinent. But, even if I was writing about characters in my songs, those characters were dealing with whatever I was dealing with. However, when I was faced with real adversity in my life, when my sister Raylan and my dad died within months of each other, music failed me. I just couldn't express what I was feeling in song. So I put my guitar away for literally 15 years and decided to try comedy as my therapy instead.
Did that work?
I don't know if it worked. It was more of a diversion than anything else. I mean, it was great to try to laugh it off, but in the end, it was just another way of avoiding it. It took joining a writing group with my friends Dylan Brody and Parker Bennett to exorcise those demons and perform a monologue about dropping a load of dirt right through my dad's casket at his funeral.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I remember when you first sent it to me, and it blew my mind. And we're actually going to include that story at the end of this episode after the credits. So listeners, make sure that you check it out.
Great, because it's the most Spinal Tap moment I've got, buddy.
Yeah. It's a profound story, not so much a hilarious story, but I'm really glad people are going to be able to hear it. And our guest today, Margaret Cho, has also used music and comedy to deal with her demons. Her stand-up shows and her music albums, they're all very personal. And I tell you, that's why I think her work resonates with so many people.
Yeah, Margaret is certainly great at dishing out universal truths in her own inimitable way.
True, true, true. So let's get to our conversation with Margaret. But first, a short break.
And now a very funny and talented comedian whose career started when she won a contest to open for Jerry Seinfeld at the age of 15, Margaret Cho. Hi, Margaret. Welcome to the show. In the movie This Is Spinal Tap, one of the great scenes is David at St. Hubbins' girlfriend, Janine, ends up taking over the role as the manager of the band. She hooks them up with a gig at an Air Force base, and it's obviously not an appropriate venue for them. Fred Willard is hysterical as the head of the base, and he basically has no idea what the band is, what they do, and nobody enjoys their music. Now, according to our head writer, ChatGPT, you also had a difficult gig in front of military folk, didn't you?
I always have a bad gig here and there. Probably the worst was a kind of a Falling Wallendas thing. When I was a teenager, I had to open for a trapeze rock band. So they would play electric guitar, jump on a trampoline, get on a trapeze and swing, and then get down and do flips and then play guitar again. So in the middle of that, the guitarist missed the trampoline and fell on the floor and was impaled by the headstock, the neck
Oh, wow.
of the guitar. And so he was bleeding and holding his intestines in, I think. And the audience was 10-year-old kids from local schools.
Whoa.
And everybody's screaming and crying, and the curtain closed. And then I had to come in and say, well, I think that guy's alive. And then he came out holding his guts in saying, I'm alive. But I don't think he lived. I don't think he lived. I'm not sure. I was really traumatized as well because I was about 15. So I'm not sure exactly what happened to him. But they should have been called the Falling Melindas.
Yes.
I don't know why that band wasn't called the Falling Melindas.
Okay, I have to defend myself here. I earned the name the Falling Melindas. There was a show in Milwaukee. My bass player, Scott, during the last song, jumped over the PA system onto the dance floor. So I, like a lemming, followed him. The only difference was I had just bought these really high platform shoes the day of the show, and they were very slick on the bottom. So when my feet hit the lucite dance floor, my legs flew straight up into the air. I cracked my head against the ground, and this led to severe spinal damage, which I'm dealing with until this day. So our Spinal Tap moment included actual spinal damage, and I can't see how you get more falling Melinda than that.
Yeah, definitely.
When you mentioned that you were opening for a band with trampolines, I first thought like maybe it was Fish.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then when it was impaled in blood, I was thinking maybe it was Guar.
Oh, yes.
Could have gone a bunch of different
And
ways.
Gwar, I played with at Bonnaroo. I was in their show, and Gwar is so weird because they eat so much Altoids because they're in the heat, in the summer heat, and they have all the rubber prosthetics and costumes on, and they're so overwhelmed with like kind of silicone and rubber that to stay cool in their suits, they have to eat a lot of mints. And so they smell like Altoids.
That's not bad.
Oh, weird. Does that actually work?
Yeah, just to refresh their insides because they're in those suits for hours in these summer rock festivals. You know, it's going to be really very difficult. So that's how they stay cool.
Well, did you ever eat Altoids in the dark? Because sparks will actually fly out of your mouth.
I have not seen that yet, so I'll have to do now.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
It's very interesting. Well, Spinal Tap is in the weird world of the confluence of comedy and music, right? They're musicians, but they're also the funniest guys in the world.
Yes, yes.
Margaret, you're a comedian who also plays music, so you must know better than most what a bad position it is for a comedian to have to open for a music act. I remember I saw your friend Robin Williams perform at the Amnesty International concert in about 1986. On the same bill as The Police, U2, Peter Gabriel, and Lou Reed.
Wow.
And he bombed miserably because no one really wanted to hear jokes in that setting, not even Robin Williams jokes.
Yeah.
How tough is it to tour with musicians?
It's very tough. I actually toured a couple of summers with Cyndi Lauper and Blondie and Erasure and
That's so cool.
Joan Jett. It was a really cool tour, but it was very hard to go out in between all of these legendary performers. But I kind of got used to it. I never got there's a certain flair that certain guys that do it a lot, like David Cross always did rock clubs and opened for bands, as does Neil Hamburger.
So we had David Cross on, and he told us a really funny story when he was opening for Amy Mann, and he was getting heckled. You know, he's used to that, and that's his shtick, right? But Amy didn't like it, and she came out and scolded the audience, and he's like, I appreciate that she was trying to protect me, but I'm not a baby. I can handle this. And she came out there, and really, I felt like I was 10 years old.
That's hilarious. Well, Amy loves comedians. She loves comedy. She's always had us in mind. I love her music. I aspire to write and play and sing like her. But, you know, she always has one of us, whether it's David or Grantley Phillips, one of my other band members, or Paul F. Tompkins. She's always got one of us with her.
Speaking of touring with Cyndi Lauper, back in 2008, you were part of the True Colors tour that she organized, and it was an amazing group of artists. We've had several guests talk about Cyndi and what a character she is, and also how much she's influenced other female artists. In fact, Vicki Peterson told us what a mentor she was to the Bangles.
When I was on tour with Cindy, we were also on tour with the B-52s, who at the end of the show, Cindy wanted everybody to sing True Colors, and she assigned a line for, she's like,
I want you to just say it really softly, Fred. Just sing it like a lullaby, Fred.
And Fred was like, Cindy, I don't think anybody wants me to sing that song. It was a very good conversation to be in on. So he ended up not singing a part of True Colors.
That is so funny.
That's wonderful.
We mastered our second album at Sterling Sound in New York, and Cyndi Lauper was mastering, I believe, her greatest hits at the time. This is probably 1995. And I heard her scolding her team when they were looking at the images from the album cover, and she went, I'm the art director here.
I just have to say, between Margaret and you, in terms of Cyndi Lauper impressions, you're kind of bringing up the rear. Let's just say that.
I worked with her for so long, and, it's so funny that she'll call me and she's like,
How you doing, kid?
it's not an act. Like, that's who she is. It's really incredible.
That's very cool.
We ask every guest this question, and lately we've been forgetting it until we're about to say goodbye. I was like, oh! Anyway, what is your favorite scene from This Is Spinal Tap, and why?
Well, my favorite is when Harry Shearer gets stuck in the cocoon and he can't get out, because they try so many things to get him out with the blowtorch, and they're like trying to pry it open, and then they finally get him out and the song's over. It's just all the timing and the way that Nigel's like looking, like, and they're like trying, sort of like also, but still trying to play. And it's just so realistic. And just those cocoons are just so weird and like veiny. It is so ridiculous. I also love when they do the recreations, like when they're the skiffle band, right, or like Listen to the Flower People. They're so right on, like whether they're parodying the Tammy Show, or I don't even know what shows that would be. Dinah Shore? I'm not sure.
And I'm really glad you brought up the Tammy Show. I don't know if you've ever seen the DVD, but it was in LA.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most amazing concerts no one's ever seen. Marvin Gaye's on, and Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys are on, and James Brown is on.
So incredible. I mean, they don't really have anything like that anymore. Of course, they have the award shows, but that's like once a year. You don't necessarily have these kinds of like things where you're seeing all of the artists of the moment play.
Well, I have this DVD collection of the Midnight Special. And the Midnight Special was, I think, filmed in Burbank at the NBC studios. And it wasn't recorded at midnight. I think it was at 4 p.m. But they would have live performances of the greatest bands every week.
The one show that I've always wanted to be on is Musikladen, the one in Germany, where you would see like Roxy Music or Susie Quattro, or it was like very glam heavy.
You know what's so funny is in the 70s, I used to watch Solid Gold sometimes, and I wanted Kiss to be on there. And I was just like, you never knew who the guest was going to, at least I didn't know. But this idea that I was trying to find Kiss on live TV was...
Were they too hard rock? Solid Gold was very top 40.
Probably.
But also, I just watched the Beastie Boys documentary for the 20th time, and they were on Soul Train. Don Cornelius was a big fan of theirs.
Yeah.
Really?
It was really cool.
That's great.
As a tour manager, the most TV I ever experienced was with Radiohead. They were Conan O'Brien's first ever music guest when his show was brand new. They were on the Arsenio Hall show on an episode with an archetypal early 90s guest lineup that included comedian Dennis Miller and Playboy Playmate of the Year Anna Nicole Smith. We went to Long Island for the infamous MTV Beach House performance where Tom York dove in the pool.
Oh, yeah.
And the band even flew back to the UK for about 48 hours for the BBC's Top of the Pops. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go with them for that one.
I saw Radiohead. It was just Tom, and it was on the release of Pablo Honey, and it was acoustic, him in Justin Herman Plaza in San Francisco, an outdoor free show.
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, yeah.
I was there.
That was an incredible thing, like, because all anybody knew was Creep.
Right.
But it was such an amazing thing to see him there.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, because this is just a funny little story, but they were all figuring out what it meant to be rock stars, and they were just kind of getting the persona thing down. And so I remember that Tom and I pulled up in a van or something like that. And the van door opened and, I stepped out, Tom stepped out, and he was carrying his own acoustic guitar. And he took about 5 steps and he looks at me and goes, "Here, you carry this."
Oh, that was that show?
That's funny.
I was totally fine with it. I thought that makes sense. Of course I should be carrying your guitar. But, it took him a second to realize, hey, wait a minute. I shouldn't be doing this.
It was one of those shows that I'm like, I didn't realize how lucky I was until much later. And you're like, oh, we were in like the presence of such greatness. And you just take it for granted. We're just seeing a guy play this free show outside. And then you realize, oh my God, it's Tom York.
And what else was really funny was the radio announcer said, "Okay, here they are, Radiohead." And Tom walks up alone.
Yeah.
And he just looks around sheepishly and goes, "It's just me, I'm afraid."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So incredible.
Margaret, you had a groundbreaking sitcom, All American Girl on ABC in like 1994. I read that the producer said you were too heavy and then you lost a lot of weight and then they said you were too skinny and that you weren't Asian enough. Can you give us some of those stories? Because it's insane.
Well, it was insane because I was just so focused on losing weight to be thin enough for TV. And then the show was canceled and replaced by Drew Carey's show because he's so thin. Oh. It was really ridiculous. But I was really super confused about what to do. It was early 90s. There was no other networks. There was just 3 networks. Fox had just kind of started on certain evenings. So you only had so many opportunities to be on television. And there was no other Asian Americans on TV. There had not been a show like that. So it was a pretty heavy burden to sort of carry the weight of the responsibility of visibility for Asians, but also to be considered like, oh, well, you're too fat to play yourself, essentially. It was so ludicrous. So I had a really hard time. I'm glad that I got to do that show. It's called All American Girl, and I'm hoping that it's going to be the one thing that keeps me from getting deported.
There you go.
They can't deport me now. I'm the All American Girl. No way.
Yeah, hopefully your passport helps you with that too.
But, I hope, maybe. I have a real ID.
Yeah, good. I don't even have that yet. Are there any other notable conversations about other aspects of the show that you remember with TV execs that were just like jaw droppers or forehead slappers?
Well, just this idea that we weren't Asian enough. So we had to hire people from UCLA to come and be Asian consultants on the show and help us. But I kind of understand because the other show that was really popular at the time was A Third Rock from the Sun. And they actually had people from NASA come and give input on extraterrestrials and what they would be like if they actually lived in an apartment in New York or wherever they lived. I'm not sure. So the idea of having consultants, it's a very sort of 90s thing. But at the same time, I think I know how to be Asian. All the other people that I was working with, we had a pretty good idea, but it was ridiculous.
You weren't exactly new to it.
Yeah, the NASA thing only holds if they actually had aliens come on and teach these people how to be aliens, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty insane. You've had this tangential music career as well, which I have to admit I wasn't aware of until I researched you, and your influences are all right down the center with me, and you've worked with some of our most favorite eccentrics. You worked with Andrew Bird, you've worked with Fiona Apple, and you've worked with John Bryan, who I met once, and I told him I thought he looked like the male Mary Poppins.
He is very Mary Poppins.
Isn't he?
True, yes. I never thought of it, but you're absolutely right. He's got that ethos. Well, he's that way because he's like an Ernie Kovacs freak.
Really?
So he loves the era of Ernie Kovacs and the improvisational sort of mentality. So he comes at music the way that Ernie Kovacs went for comedy. So it's that aesthetic, but he's very Mary Poppins. You're absolutely right.
Alan, we have never had a guest give you that kind of air cover before.
I'm so happy about that.
I was just about to elbow you in the ribs for just being such a goofball on that.
Well, it was funny. I met him because I was at, I believe, Sunset Sound, and I was watching Brian Wilson record because my friends were in the band, and then I ran into him. He was wearing like this gabardine coat that was really blousy, but the guy is unbelievable, and I love his production work with Fiona, right? Even though they totally ditched his production on that great album. You know what I'm talking about?
The Idler Wheel? I think
Yeah.
it's the Idler Wheel that has a really long title that's like a city block long.
And he produced it, and then they went with somebody else, but he also did the album before that, which was great. And he worked with Amy Mann. He's amazing. But what about
He's
Andrew
amazing.
Bird? I know people who were in the band with him when he was in the Squirrel Nut Zippers.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, and he just did an album with Madison Cunningham, I believe, right?
Yeah.
But he's a peculiar dude.
He's a genius, also loves comedy. He's a really fun person. Like, he's such a virtuoso, like he's such a musical genius. As with John Bryan, they just think differently about
Right.
music. And I learned so much from them. John, I learned chords. I learned how to produce. I learned how to play, what instruments to choose. Like, the whole time when I was working with him, we spent hours picking out instrument by instrument, and he's just extraordinary. So I'm really lucky that I got to work with him.
So for our listeners who don't know who John Bryan is, because he's very crucial to the LA music scene, John's produced a lot of people. I think he played with Jellyfish for years.
Yeah.
And he had a show at Largo where he would cover songs, but he would play every instrument.
Yeah. And he's like an incredible film composer. He has a long working relationship with Paul Thomas Anderson, where he's scored all of his movies.
Didn't he do Eternal Sunshine of the...
Yeah. Also
Yeah.
Michel Gondry.
Yeah.
A long working relationship with him. He's just a genius. He just thinks differently about music. He thinks differently about playing. What a brilliant guy.
How is it working with Fiona Apple? Because Fiona Apple is as good as anyone ever.
The best. She's just a fun person to hang out with. She's a good friend of mine as well. So I'm really lucky to know her. And, she is just so incredibly talented. And I always just get like starstruck by her, even though, I've known her for so long. But yeah, she's phenomenal. Also, Patty Griffin. I'm really lucky enough to have written with her and played with her. I'm just really fortunate to have found such amazing people to collaborate with.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Any Spinal Tap moments you can share in the studio with Fiona or John or Patty or anybody?
Well, John doesn't start work until he wakes up around 6 p.m. So you're in a vampire life. Like, it's a totally different kind of existence. A lot of musicians are that, but I've never been quite like that. With Patty, I was at a writing session with her at her house, and we were trying to work something out, and it wasn't working. And then I was so frustrated. I went to the bathroom and I had the worst, crazy diarrhea at her house. Sorry, Patty, if you're listening, sorry. And I was in there for quite a while. And I came back and the whole song was written.
Wow.
She had figured it out, and it was right there, and she was playing it for me. And I was like, oh my God, I should have diarrhea more often. Just shit it all out.
I'm glad she didn't have enough time to write a whole album. That's all I got to say.
I mean, she could have. But that's rock and roll, you know?
Well, thank you for adding to our lengthy catalog of poop stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Between your music and doing albums, doing television, of course, your stand-up and your tours.
Fashion design.
And your tours, by the way, just have the most epic names, right? Like Notorious C.H.O, which of course made me think of my dog, Biggie Smalls. Cho Dependent. There is no I in team, but there is a Cho in Psycho. Were you saying Psycho or Psycho?
I think it's Psycho.
Psycho.
I don't know. Either one is correct.
And then, of course, Fresh Off the Bloat.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you've been very entrepreneurial in a bunch of ways. And the one other guest that we've had who I feel like has been similarly entrepreneurial with their band is Nick Hexum from 311.
Mm-hmm.
They have beer and they have
They're so great.
weed and they have
It's 311 Day.
311
Right.
Day in Vegas. Exactly.
Yeah.
On or around March 11th. And he
love
bought
it.
an island off the coast of Louisiana where they were going to try and do events. That venture didn't work out because he got blown away by a hurricane, that sort of stuff.
Oh.
But anyway,
Malaria.
one of the things that you joined the board of directors of a company, Good Vibrations, which is a sex toy retailer.
Yes.
Hopefully those stock options have done really well for you. But I'm sort of just curious, any standout Spinal Tap moments of being on the board of Good Vibrations or any of these other ventures?
Well, I was like the tester. I was like Marge that tests the waistband of the Fruit of the Loom. Like I would get all the sex toys before they would go to market. And I would say like, well, maybe we should buy these. Maybe we should put these in our stores. Would this sell? Would this not sell? There were a couple of things that I really believed in that they were not in agreement with. I had sort of more about like TMS and how to help using these sort of electrodes in sex toy use. And they didn't go for that. I was like big champion for that. But I rejected the womanizer, which is the little stimulators that have a little air pocket. They make a little like blowing sensation. I was like, those aren't going to sell. Those became the biggest seller. So I'm not that smart when it comes to it, but I had a lot of very strong opinions about what we should be using. I love all of that world. I loved the intricacy of all these machines and very interesting.
Well, I would love to have your top 3 choices.
The womanizer was not one,
right?
But I do love the eroticizer, which is Dr. Ruth's vibrator.
Really?
Which it works on a different frequency than other vibrators that it makes it so that you don't go numb. So it's the eroticizer, also the Kegel sizer, which is it's kind of a barbell. It's like a vaginal barbell, but it's also can be used as a sex toy. Very, very handy. Does double duty.
It's called the Kegel sizer?
The Kegel sizer.
Okay.
It's very clean because it's all stainless steel, so you can sanitize it very easily.
Yeah, mine is asbestos, which is really horrible.
Yeah, that's not good. It's carcinogens all over.
OSHA. Yep.
Not good. Also, I think the Hitachi Magic Wand, it's a classic for a reason. There's a lot of attachments that you can get to enhance your experience with it. I think it is the best sex toy ever created. I'm really down on the Sybian is very popular on radio shows.
Yeah, sure. I've seen
they're always
Howard
talking
Stern
about the
used to do
Sybian.
that. Yeah.
Always. That's a drain on the power grid. You know what? I will always blow out all my fuses with that thing. I need a generator.
It's expensive though, too, right? It's
quite pricey. The Motor Bunny is like the home equivalent, but it still will throw your fuses up. You don't want to use those.
Yeah, and also, if you don't know what a Sybian is, it's basically like a saddle with an attachment.
The whole thing vibrates.
Yeah, it looks fun. So recently, I was flying to Milwaukee, and I got stopped by TSA, and I was like, why? And they're searching through my bag, and they found a bullet.
Oh.
And I got in big trouble. Mm-hmm. Didn't TSA stop you?
Okay, well, when I was working for Good Vibrations, I was going to Kink Castle at the Armory, which is where they would make a lot of pornography there. But also they would have like these huge, very decadent parties. And so as a gift, they gave me a fucksol, which is a sawzall, but with a dildo at the end.
Wow.
And they gave it to me to take home on the plane. So I didn't have a carrying case. I just had like a sawzall with a dildo at the end that I had to carry to Southwest.
Who doesn't?
And go, okay, I'm just going to put this, I guess the weight, it's heavy. It wasn't 50 pounds, but I had to check it. I don't think I could get,
Probably
I don't
not.
know.
Probably not.
I didn't try through TSA.
Didn't they stop you?
Well, I got it. They put the sticker right on it. They put to Burbank from Oakland. It got on the plane, but I mean, nobody stopped me. I don't think it's a security risk. It's just weird.
Yeah.
It's just weird. I have it here. I still have it in my house.
Yeah, that's a great story. And a good thing you didn't have a suitcase. They had to put an overload on it because there were so many sex toys in it.
It was an inconsiderate gift because you should have just shipped it. You should have said, you know what, this is for you and we're going to ship it.
Right.
Speaking of inconsiderate, weren't you kind of inconsiderate when you went to the AVN Porn Awards?
Well, when I went to the AVN Porn Awards, this was the same era. It was kind of fun. I brought Madison Young's adult film star on a leash, which was great. It was actually the leash made of pearls, which was really beautiful. She's lovely. So we were there and all these porn stars were in my room and they started to drink GHB and they all started to run against the plate glass windows.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, this is like dangerous because we're on the 27th floor. They're all like running at a really like fast rate in the plate glass windows. And I'm like, would you know my name if you saw me in heaven? You know, like I'm like trying to, I'm going to sing this about a porn star in 20 years. Like this is just an awful Eric Clapton song about to happen. You know, like I didn't want them to fall out the window.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. We the Falling Melendas had a song Porn off our second album, Belittle. And in the lyrics, we actually name two big stars of the time, Peter North and Nikki Dial. Remember them?
Yeah.
So anyway, we were going to do a video for porn, and we were thinking about who to cast, various Chicago strippers and general porn stars. And one of them that came up was Janine Lindemulder.
Wow.
And we happened to run into her on a plane from LA to Chicago. She's famous because she was on the cover of a Blink 182 album that had like an enema play on words or something.
I thought you ran into Jenna Jameson.
No. This was Janine. And then we saw her that night perform at the Admiral, which is a famous strip joint in Chicago.
Wow.
And it was really cool. I mean, you can't beat the porn stars of the 80s and 90s.
I love them. I love all that era of stars. They don't make them like they used to. I don't think OnlyFans, it doesn't cut it the same way. I mean, I appreciate the OnlyFans, but it's not the same.
No, I used to actually remember Tiffany Million?
Yeah.
I used to talk to her about stocks on AOL back in the 90s. Yeah. So they're very savvy.
Very smart about their money. It's really incredible.
It's not a career that lasts very long, so you have to be very frugal.
And I think Jenna Jameson was really, really smart about it. She sort of went into marketing her image and toys, and that's where they make the money is toys or like the mold of vagina and asshole.
Well, I'm friends with Sasha Grey, who is genius. At marketing her career.
Genius. Always at kink.com at the Armory did a lot of shooting with them.
Yeah,
and
Sasha's great. Yeah, she's beautiful and she's really sharp, and I really like her a lot.
Yeah, I love her.
I read another great story about you, which I think is a funny racist Spinal Tap moment. Didn't you have a weird interaction with Tilda Swinton, who's one of my faves?
I love her, but she actually wrote to me. This was a long time ago. So she played an Asian man in Doctor Strange. So before the movie came out, she emailed me and she said, "Do you think it'd be all right if I play an Asian man and he's in a film and is it all right? Is it all right? Is it all right?" And I was like, I can't give you a Tilda Swinton #1. Like, I can't give her.
I heard she contacted John Wayne and Mickey Rooney before to see if it was all right.
I mean, she should have. That's the more appropriate people to ask. I mean, it was weird because I love her. That was in 2012, and somebody asked her about it more recently. She said, "Oh, it was a misunderstanding." I'm like, no, it wasn't, but it's all right. She's cool. I think it's just a different time. Now Hollywood is sort of updated. Now we actually have Asians play Asian characters, which I think is for the best.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to talk about your album, Lucky Gift. Tell us about the recording of it, who you worked with, and then maybe relay some Spinal Tap moments for us.
Half of the album I worked with Roger Rocha from Four Non Blondes, and a lot of that was recorded in San Francisco. And some of the recordings are actually from 2014, so some pretty old stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. One of the songs that I recorded then was a cover of the album is Doot Doot by Freur, which is one of my favorite songs ever. It's like a very classic new wave song, but nobody's covered it. So I was really excited to cover it.
Cool.
And I have a track that's my stab at a Jellyfish song. They're like one of my very favorite bands. And so it's a Jellyfish, but from like Belly Button era, not necessarily Spilt Milk era. So not when John Bryan was in the band.
Interesting.
But I love what I was able to do with Roger. And then the second half of the album was all done last year with Garrison Starr. She's somebody I've been collaborating with for years. Right. She worked on all of my records, and she's the main producer that I work with. And she's phenomenal. So I wanted to make a Bangles record. I wanted to make that kind of, not Velvet Underground, but Paisley Underground, but also Velvet Underground. That sort of very like Lilith Fair record.
Really?
And so I'm feeling it. I'm feeling like a Fiona Apple. I'm feeling like a Joan Osborne. I'm feeling like a Natalie Merchant a lot.
Were there any Spinal Tap moments making this record?
I was really lucky. There weren't a lot of mishaps. There's always something going wrong. For some reason, we were just so lucky making this album where it was just really smooth and smooth sailing, which is so rare. But yeah, I feel like the Spinal Tap moments happen in my everyday life all the time. There's always something dumb. But, at least right now, it's the best time to write jokes about it, like to be able to be out on tour and just tell the crazy stories and let it happen. So it doesn't matter. It's all good.
How are you going to handle the new administration? I was in a School of Song thing with Brian Eno, and one of our assignments was to write a song about revolution. And in general, it made me realize how little the art community has stepped up. There's not a 60s, MC5, CCR, CSN.
We need protest songs. I think we need a lot of them, but also we just need to take our art and apply it. So my latest campaign is you can't spell felon without Elon.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm telling a lot of very crass jokes about what's going on. But, it's like that's all I can do is make jokes about it. That's the thing is they hate to be made fun of.
Yeah. Obama making fun of him is probably the impetus behind his whole effort to destroy America, right?
Yeah.
The White House press correspondence dinner
yeah,
in 2014.
Absolutely. He can't stand it. And so that's the one thing that we have to do because the right can't make jokes. They're just not very good at it. They're not good at rock and roll and they're not good at being funny. And so, if we can really hammer them and make them pay, they're so
thin-skinned,
so limited. They have no generosity of spirit. They have no way to laugh at themselves. So that's how we got to go about it, I think.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up, I do want to say your new album, Lucky Gift, was produced by Garrison Starr. I have been a fan of Garrison's since hearing her song Superhero on KCRW back in, this is almost 25 years ago, probably, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it was just last year, she opened for Jason Isbell at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, which I just thought was so cool.
So cool. She's the coolest. And I love working with her. She's just the best band you could ask for. I just learn so much from her all the time. And I love her music.
Yeah, neat. So where can our listeners best keep up with you?
People can find me at margaretshow.com, where the album is available. You can watch the lyric videos and buy tickets to the shows and also buy my album. And then you can find me on Instagram at Margaret_Cho and on TikTok at The Margaret Cho.
Oh my, this has been quite a conversation. Music, comedy, sex toys, porn. It's like typical Thanksgiving dinner talk at the Keller household. Thanks so much, Margaret. It was really fun having you today.
Thank you.
Thanks to Margaret for sharing her stories. As Alan mentioned, it was a veritable story cornucopia suitable for any family Thanksgiving table. And speaking of Alan, as promised in our intro to this episode, there is one more story before we say goodbye. Please stay tuned after these credits to hear Alan's short story called The Abraham, which I have to say, as a longtime fan of Alan's creative work, stands alongside some of his best songs as a beautiful, moving composition. Too Much Effing Perspective is a Milwaukee Talkies original. Our editor is Gretchen Kilby. Our music composer is J.K. Harrison. Please follow us on Instagram at TMEP Show. Visit our website at tmepshow.com to sign up for our email list and find our other episodes featuring rock stars, comedians, and entertainment luminaries on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen.
Although it would be as great as having armadillos in our trousers, this podcast is not affiliated with This Is Spinal Tap, and no person or entity connected with the film has sponsored or endorsed its content. The podcast is not affiliated, sponsored, or licensed by Authorized Spinal Tap LLC or Century of Progress Productions. And now the audio portion of my short story, The Abraham, performed at Kulak's Woodshed in North Hollywood, California, sometime in 2018. You can see the entire video on YouTube. Just look up The Abraham, Alan Keller. Thanks for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, reading The Abraham, please welcome Alan Keller.
Thank you so much. I haven't been on stage since America ceased to be a democracy, so this is an incredible pleasure. The Abraham. Questioning the choice of a casket already in the ground is tantamount to questioning the location of a skyscraper at the ribbon cutting. But here I was at the Beth Hagedal Hamadras Cemetery, second-guessing the type of wood I selected at the casketeria while staring down at my dad's grave. The sales mortician had gently pushed the aptly named Benjamin with its satin-stained Appalachian oak, velvet interior, and an eternal subscription to AOL. Instead, I chose the more modest, actually the most modest, Abraham, a hand-hewn, unpainted box stuffed with wheat straw. My old man used to brag about using a water pick as a home colonic, so I didn't think he'd feel too self-conscious crossing the pearly gates with a few pine splinters. Yit gadol v'yit gadash shemei rabbah, bi'alma divarach hiute. As a rabbi recited the Kaddish, the Jewish equivalent of, "That's all, folks," I couldn't help notice my family had now as many people below ground as above. And that trend was never going to change in our favor. Hell, my mom's name was already etched in marble next to my dad's. And she was standing next to me. Knowing her, I'm surprised she didn't jump into the hole right then and there to save us the trouble of coming back to this god-awful place in the future. This was a woman who once dropped me off at a concert and waited 6 hours in the car while I watched Pink Floyd, Aerosmith, and Cheap Trick. V'yam lich malchutei v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. The first Keller to put down roots here was just 12 feet away from me. Her simple pink granite tombstone read Susan Keller, 1951 to 1954. Susie died from pneumonia a decade before I was born. If I hadn't accidentally found her hand-colored portrait in my parents' closet when I was 12, buried beneath a stack of Life magazines, I may have never known she existed. When I asked who the pretty little girl was posing next to a hobby horse, my mom sprinted from me like she'd been perched on her starting blocks for 20 years, just waiting for someone to raise the topic so she could run away from it. I would never bring up Susan Keller again. It would take my mom a half century before she could talk about her firstborn without feeling waterboarded. Yehesh Shemei Rabbah Mivarach Leolam U'almei Almaya. Did I have that with a British accent in there? I guess it was. Palestine was a British territory. So, Dad never found such equanimity. The only time he ever brought up Susie was the day he rediscovered a dented safe deposit box he'd hidden and forgotten high above the ceiling tiles in the basement. He opened the container like a sarcophagus filled with ancient pathogens and unfolded a fragile carbon copy of a letter he'd sent to Susie's pediatrician. It said simply, "You killed my daughter." It had been rubber banded to a stack of unopened doctor's bills stamped, "Referred to Bill Collection Agency." Yiparach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpar, v'yitroman. Dad tried his best to erase all this from his memory, but like the mole on his cheek he had burned off, the scar left behind was twice as large as what it replaced. Relatives confided in me that the entire year that Susie died, Dad would disappear for days, only to turn up in random parts of town sleeping in his truck. As far as I know, this would be the first time he'd been back to the cemetery since her funeral. I imagine over the years he rerouted many trips around Milwaukee to avoid going near the place. As of today, he'd never leave again. V'yit naseh, v'yit chadar, v'yit halal, v'yit halal, shemei dekudeshav beriach hu. By the middle of the prayer, my eyes began to water like a backed-up toilet. The mournographers, people who disappear from the lives of the sick only to return at their funerals for the buffet, thought I was crying. Actually, I was tearing up because the tiny tinfoil sun perched in the frosted sky was strafing us with precision glare like a sniper. There was no place for my innocent retina to hide from the prismatic shrapnel ping-ponging off the faceted icy spackle winter had sloshed everywhere. Very conversational. I turned around to see if everyone was having the same problem I was, but the mournographers' melancholy faces smeared across my vision like Francis Bacon portraits. Birchata v'shirata tushbechata. It didn't help that I was so fucking tired. Not sleep deprived tired either. Anemia tired. Chloroform tired. Carbon monoxide tired. The tired you feel before you slip into a coma. The tired you feel in a dream, not the tired that gets you to one. I'd been having bad dreams ever since my sister Ray Ellen got sick in 1998. I would bolt up in the middle of the night, eyes open, screaming in silence. Help! 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 Feeling like an embryo trying to communicate with the world through an ultrasound. My wife Lois would watch me in horror, afraid to wake me because of an episode in The Honeymooners she'd seen about a somnambulant Ralph. Eventually, I'd get my body and my mind back in the same dimension, but I'd feel out of sorts for days, feeling like I could be disassembled at any moment and left in pieces. V'nechemata de'amiran be'alma v'imru. Milton would be the third Keller buried at Beth Hagedal. In a way, he'd be buried twice that day. Once beneath 2 tons of dirt, and the other beneath 2 tons of grief. Grief meant for someone else. Like a guy whose birthday is on Christmas, hardly anyone at Milton's funeral was thinking about Milton. Even my wife and I couldn't help looking 4 feet to our right at a mound of moist black clay sparkling with ice crystals where we buried Ray Ellen less than 2 months before. Ray's death was the kind of detour that never leads you back to where you were going. My entire family got lost that day. Tom, my brother-in-law, and her high school sweetheart was so inconsolable, he left her grave unmarked for well over a year. A while later, the picture of Ray Ellen carved into the marble on her tombstone would be defaced by neo-Nazis, returning her to anonymity for another year. Ray Ellen was killed by multiple myeloma, a cancer that corrupts plasma cells and turns bones into china. Overnight, she went from being a perfectly healthy 43-year-old woman to being rushed to the hospital to have an emergency spinal fusion before her cervical cord collapsed. And that was the high point of her journey. I'm not exactly sure how long it took for her to die from the moment she was diagnosed, but it seemed like the quick version of forever. When I broke the news of her death to my dad, he began to cough violently. After blood started coming up, we called 911. Milt ended up spending his daughter's funeral in the hospital. At first, I wondered if he hadn't concocted the whole coughing jag just to avoid paying a visit to Susie's grave. If he did, it was a strategy that only delayed the inevitable for a month. Oseh shalom bimroma, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. As the prayer began to wrap up, I reached for the shovel lying near my feet and held it next to me. As the eldest son, it was my duty to be the first to fill in the grave. In my vintage 1920s bear fur coat, with my wife Lois at my side, we looked like the Inuit version of American Gothic. V'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, Amen. With a nod from the funeral director, I trudged over to the large pile of dirt at the foot of the grave. It was flecked with corpses of Marlboro Reds that had been left behind, as well as their stink by the 3 scraggly gravediggers waiting in the wings to finish the job and go home to their own problems. I daintily poked around the mass with the shovel, trying to gain purchase, but it proved impenetrable. I kicked at it, but my Doc Martens were no match for the Tundra either. Then Lois gave me a look like, hurry up, I'm not the one wearing the fur. So I stomped on the shovel step with all my weight, miraculously dislodging a tiny meteorite. I bent over and pushed it onto the shovel head, then leveraged the payload over the grave. For one last moment, I looked down at the casket that represented my dad. And I tilted the shovel to the right, and I sent the chunk down toward the man who used to take me to the Milwaukee Bucks after work, even though he'd immediately fall asleep until the game was over or an usher complained about the snoring. To the man who called me boy my entire life. To the man who told me to follow my heart when I turned down a big job at Procter & Gamble after college to join a band. The man who was man enough to kiss me full on the lips in front of his friends. The man who once got drunk with a car dealer and came home with a new Buick and a new Fiat. The man who hated waste so much that when he broke a glass jar into a 50-gallon crock pot full of homemade sauerkraut, he refused to throw it away and ate the entire contents, glass and all, over the course of the year. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The man who once kicked a hole in the door when he was mad at my mom. The man who, when I was 11, I overheard on the phone tell someone who wasn't my mother that he loved her. The man whose domineering father forced him to take over their family electrical business after he got home from World War II and put his brothers through college instead of himself, even though he was by far the smartest of them. The man who once hallucinated that the nurses in the hospital were collecting and bottling the dark yellow sputum his sickly lungs were churning out like pus from a wound. The man who lost a baby daughter. And buried it deep inside where it couldn't be touched. The man whose death at 75 was an inconvenience to his son, who was still grieving his sister. Crack! It sounded like the earth had broken a rib. Lois and I looked down and saw that Milton's Abraham casket had been cleaved in two, exposing his arms and his legs and his head. I looked at my wife, and so he was lying there in a pile of shattered wood, like we're about to barbecue him. I turned to the funeral director and I went, "Ugh!" And he immediately threw up his hands like this, and he like a referee stopping the fight. And he said, "Back to your cars." That's when someone hit the slow-mo button on my memory. I remember walking to the parking lot, totally dazed. I looked over at my wife, Lois, and she was laughing hysterically. I turned face forward and I looked over at Lois again, and she was crying hysterically. I turned over to this side, and the gravediggers were throwing dirt on my dad's face. I again grunted, "Ugh!" And the funeral director, "Stop filling in that hole!" They dropped their shovels in unison. They didn't care. They were hourly. They just lit up 3 more Marlboro Reds and expelled a crematorium's worth of smoke into the air. Lois and I somehow got back into the car and just sat there staring at the frosted over windshield. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. 5 minutes later, I started the engine, cranked the defrost, and waited and watched the Pangea of ice on the glass slowly melt and break apart into tiny islands so I could see. And then Lois said, "I told you to go with the Benjamin." Thank you.
Evergreen Podcast Network.